If you stepped into the great hall of a medieval castle in the dead of winter, the first thing you'd feel wouldn't be the warmth of the fire. It would be a kind of cold, so contradictory it would stun anyone living today. You stand before a massive hearth, flames roaring upward, the heat hitting your face hard enough to dry your skin within minutes. Yet at the same time, your spine feels like a frozen hand is pressing straight into it. Your breath turns to mist the moment it leaves your lips, clinging to your beard like tiny needles of frost. You turn around, and that's when you see something no one expects to find inside a mighty fortress. The stone slab behind you is dusted with a thin, shimmering layer of frost, so cold that brushing it with a fingertip sends a sharp sting through your entire hand. In that moment, you understand the truth. Medieval people lived with every single day. Castles didn't hold heat, they devoured it. Those meter-thick walls behaved like massive heat pumps, drinking in every bit of warmth people tried to create and giving back thin streams of freezing air that crept across the floor like invisible blades. On many winter nights, the fire didn't burn to warm you. It burned to tell you just how cold you actually were. That feeling, beautiful in its harshness and merciless in its realism, shaped everything about life inside those stone fortresses. When night fell and the cold began to seep through every stone slab, medieval people understood one brutal truth. No one could heat a castle. Not a great hall towering 15 meters high, not walls 2 meters thick, and certainly not with any fire, no matter how large or how fiercely it burned. So they didn't fight the cold by trying to warm the whole fortress. They fought it with something far more strategic by creating warm islands inside a frozen ocean, around a blazing hearth, beside a brazier glowing with red embers, or inside a small chamber enclosed by heavy curtains. Tiny pockets of survivable heat were built with precision. In these little refuges, the temperature could rise just enough for your fingers to move again, just enough to remind you that you were still alive in the endless winter night. The people of the castle moved between these pockets like travelers crossing a frozen desert, leaving one island only when its warmth had faded and heading toward the next one to stay alive. On the harshest nights, the entire lord's family retreated into the smallest room they had, the only space where warmth could remain stable for more than a few breaths. In that world of cold stone, survival didn't depend on heating every corner. It depended on knowing exactly where the last surviving traces of warmth still lived. In our imagination, the tapestries covering castle walls are nothing more than symbols of wealth and power. But when you step into a winter room of the Middle Ages, you discover a truth that flips that idea. Completely on its head, they weren't made to impress. They were made to fight the very enemy the stone walls themselves created. As you walk closer, you feel something strange. The air behind the thick fabric is almost still, noticeably warmer than the icy draft sliding along the stone surface. And when you gently lift a corner of the tapestry, what shocks modern people most is the 10-15 centimeters gap hidden behind it, an unseen air pocket, acting as a thermal shield few ever realize existed. This wasn't decoration, it was an engineered system disguised as art. Many noble families even hung 2 layers of tapestry, a thin inner layer clinging to the wall, and a thick, high-pile outer layer, creating yet another buffer of air. Together, these 2 pockets transformed a freezing stone surface into something you could touch without feeling the warmth suck straight out of your skin. The biggest twist? In many castles, tapestries were strictly "do not touch," not because they were delicate, but because shifting one just a few centimeters could break the entire insulation system that the room depended on. And when tapestries were taken down to be replaced for winter, that brief moment was the only time the cold wind from the wall could flood the room like a beast finally released. Now imagine living there knowing that just behind that piece of fabric was a whole sea of cold waiting to swallow you the moment the system failed. Do you think you could sleep peacefully in a room like that? Share your thoughts. Your answer says a lot about your survival instincts. If there was one place in a castle that could make you forget the brutal cold lurking behind every wall, it was the Lord's 4-poster bed, an entire mini-room engineered like a thermal fortress. Before bedtime, a servant would quietly enter the solar carrying a long-handled brass bed warmer filled with glowing embers. He slid it between the layers of ice-cold blankets, and every pass released a faint white mist rising like smoke from melting frost. Even the soft scrape of metal against the sheets told you just how frozen the bed was before its nightly defrosting. When the servant finally removed the warmer and drew the bed curtains shut, the bed transformed into a sealed chamber a microclimate completely independent from the rest of the castle. And the moment you lift the curtain with your hand, something happens that surprises everyone. A wave of warm air pours out, thick and humid, like opening the lid of a steaming pot on a winter day. Hours of trapped breath and body heat had created an atmosphere of its own, reserved only for the person sleeping inside. Climbing in no longer feels like getting into a bed, it feels like stepping into another world. Smaller, darker, quieter, yet so safe and warm that you almost forget that just a few centimeters away, the stone walls are as cold as a tomb.
Come on.
On nights when the wind along the battlements howled hard enough to paralyze the will, medieval clothing wasn't just clothing. It was a mobile heating system far more sophisticated than most modern people realize. The first layer was always linen, thin, light, and absorbent, keeping the skin dry so the cold couldn't bite its way into the body. But the real magic began the moment the wool layer went on. Every tiny fiber trapped warm air, forming invisible cushions that blocked the freezing wind trying to cut through the fabric. On top of that came the thick tunic, the pressed wool overcoat, and finally the deep hooded cloak pulled low over the neck and ears, the two places where heat escaped fastest. Watch a guard standing on the castle wall, and you'll see each layer of cloth rise and fall with his breath, as if he were wearing a suit of armor built specifically to fight winter itself. Even his feet were wrapped in foot cloths, long wool strips wound tightly around the toes and heel. One wrong fold, one loose wrap, and the entire foot could go numb within minutes. Here's the twist. Medieval people understood thermal science without ever knowing the word science. They knew how to trap warm air between fabric layers, when to loosen the belt to keep blood flowing, and when to crack open the cloak just enough to release trapped moisture. Their survival didn't come from luck. It came from instinct sharpened by generations of facing a cold that never forgave mistakes. In the darkness of the castle, when the last flame had collapsed into nothing more than a faint red glow beneath a blanket of ash, medieval people entered a ritual that few documents ever describe, but one that existed as an unspoken rule passed through generations. No one slept in the cold wearing only a single layer. Taking off your clothes before bed, a habit completely normal today, was seen as reckless, even dangerous, a kind of taboo whispered about from elder to child. If you look into a great hall at night, you'd see a scene that feels almost alien to modern eyes. Dozens of people sleeping in the dim light of the hearth, still wearing their tunics, still in their wool trousers, sometimes even in their light shoes, as if they weren't preparing for sleep at all, but merely pausing in the middle of a long journey. The poorer members, guards, servants, attendants, often gathered into tight clusters, pulling a heavy animal hide over themselves and curling close together to share warmth. No one felt embarrassed. No one hesitated. On a winter night, the heat of another human body was a treasure more valuable than any luxury item. Even stranger, medieval people believed nighttime cold had a kind of spirit, an invisible chill that seeped out of the stone walls and slid into every crack it could find. So they loosened belts, opened their collars slightly to keep blood flowing, yet kept every layer of fabric close to the skin like a charm against the lurking cold watching from the dark. Some even slept in thin woolen caps, convinced that if the head got cold, sleep itself could turn into a nightmare. To modern eyes, it looks odd, but to them, it was the only way to survive. If you had to sleep in a frozen castle like that, would you sleep alone or crawl under the hide with everyone else? Share your choice and your reason in the comments. When the sun dipped behind the jagged battlements, darkness didn't just settle over the castle, it swallowed it whole, turning stone corridors into ink-black tunnels. And only then do you understand why light inside a medieval fortress wasn't something used casually, but a kind of expensive magic reserved for moments of true necessity. In the Great Hall, servants carried long splinters of wood, thin strips lit at one end, burning fast and dirty, leaving behind a harsh, smoky scent that clung to hair and clothing. Wealthier households used tallow candles, brighter but reeking of animal fat so strongly that anyone unaccustomed would instinctively grimace. And beeswax candles, the pure, golden, nearly smokeless light everyone imagines, were so costly they were reserved for ceremonies or the Lord's own chamber. But the most shocking part wasn't the scarcity of light. It was how medieval people feared their own fire. A single spark landing on straw, a candle burning unevenly, a dropped torch, any one of these could erase the entire castle in a single night. That's why anyone carrying a light through the corridors hid it behind the thin horn panels of a lantern light trapped in a cage, trembling like a living thing trying to breathe. And when you watch the
Where are you
servants
going?
extinguish each flame one by one at the command of couvre-feu, you realize that tonight, darkness isn't the terrifying part. It's the light uncontrolled, unpredictable, and powerful enough to doom the entire fortress. In the middle of a winter night, when the castle was nothing but the sound of wind howling around the watchtowers, a ritual took place, one that made anyone witnessing it for the first time feel a chill deep in
Tell
their
me what you
spine.
see.
The couvre-feu order the bell signaling, extinguish the fires. Not a religious ceremony, not some formal law, but a life or death command. After the bell rang, servants moved down the corridors with iron fire dampers in hand, snuffing out each flame gently but
Did
decisively.
you hear that?
The final light on the feasting table vanished, as if the stone itself swallowed it. Torches along the walls were taken down and dipped into sand. Every point of light that disappeared made the darkness grow thicker, heavier, like the entire castle was sinking into an invisible abyss. What shocks modern people the most isn't the strictness of the ritual, it's the fear behind it. In a world full of straw, wood, cloth, feather bedding, and dry rooftops, a single stray spark, just one, could burn the entire fortress to the ground. That's why servants checking the bedrooms tilted their heads and listened carefully. The uneven hiss of a candle, the faint fall of a coal, the whisper of wind slipping across a wick. Any of these sounds could be the beginning of disaster. And when the castle finally goes completely dark, you understand something with absolute clarity. Tonight, it isn't darkness that keeps them safe. It's making sure that no light is allowed to escape control. When the last light of sunset touched the top of the tower, the castle entered the most powerful moment of the entire day, a ritual that was as spine-chilling as it was authoritative, a ceremony that reminded everyone in the region exactly who held control. This wasn't just closing the gate, it was a declaration. From this moment on, the entire domain belongs to the night and to the will of the Lord. First came the drawbridge. Two teams of soldiers turned the great winch wheels, lifting the massive wooden platform inch by inch until it rose off the water, becoming a suspended wall between life and death. As it locked upright, it let out a long metallic groan like steel scraping against bone. Next was the portcullis. The iron grid, weighing hundreds of pounds, dropped down its stone grooves with a single echoing clang that rolled across the courtyard. It was the sound the villagers outside the walls feared most, the sound that told them they were too late to seek shelter. Then came the oak gates, thick as ancient tree trunks, slammed shut and secured by enormous iron bars that made the entire castle tremble. Just hearing them lock was enough to feel the weight of an entire feudal system in your chest. Every lock, every key, every mechanism was handed to the Castellan, the one man whose authority, after dark, sometimes surpassed even the Lord's. Because if he slipped even once, the whole fortress could fall before dawn. The armories, the granaries, the treasury, each was sealed in turn. Every bar that slid into place was another announcement. Tonight, no one enters, no one leaves, and no one has the right to cross these walls. And if you stood there and witnessed the entire ritual with your own eyes, you'd feel an unsettling truth settle over you. Nighttime in a medieval castle wasn't a time of rest. It was the final exam of power. If you ever thought a medieval castle was the ultimate symbol of safety, one night inside those cold stone walls would change your mind forever. Many people of the time believed that a castle's nights were more dangerous than the enemies outside, and the moment darkness takes over, you finally understand why. It starts with the wind. Not the open field kind, but the kind that slips through narrow stone gaps, producing a sound disturbingly similar to someone whistling in the dark. Long, thin, and so cold it raises every hair on the back of your neck. Then comes the faint crack of stone contracting in the frost, echoing along the walls like footsteps pacing right above your head. A guard only needs to turn his head a second too late to catch a moving shadow at the end of the corridor, only to discover it's just a heavy curtain stirred by a sudden draft. But here's the real twist. Absolute silence was the most terrifying sign of all. When the wind stopped howling, when the stones stopped groaning, when the fire no longer crackled, that was when every guard tightened his grip on the spear. Silence meant something was wrong, something shifting in the darkness where no sound should be missing. One small noise, a bucket tipping, a horse flinching in the stable was enough to make the entire great hall jump to their feet at once, as if alerted by an invisible intruder. Those nights felt longer than the day itself, each minute a psychological battle between humans and a darkness with no name. If you had to live through a winter night like that, what would terrify you the most? The wind, the cracking stone, or the absolute silence? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into the medieval world.